secrets fester behind the locked wrought-iron gates of Atherton's wealthiest estates. Albert Jones firmly believed his life was flawlessly curated: 2 angelic daughters, a booming venture capital empire, and a pristine mansion, managed by a devoted maid. But an unannounced return home violently shattered his carefully constructed illusion, exposing a chilling, unimaginable betrayal. Grief had built the invisible walls of the Jones estate, but limitless wealth had decorated them. Following the sudden passing of his wife Sarah to an undiagnosed aneurysm 5 years prior, Albert Jones had buried his shattered heart beneath the lucrative soil of Silicon Valley. As a senior partner at a premier venture capital firm on Sand Hill Road, Albert measured success by quarterly projections, successful startup acquisitions, and the immaculate appearance of his home life. His sprawling $15 million modern Tudor home in Atherton, California, was a testament to his triumphs. Within this fortress of glass mahogany and imported Italian marble lived his 2 daughters. Clarissa, 19, was a sophomore at Stanford University, currently taking a highly publicized mental health semester to focus on her equestrian training. Harper, 16, was a straight-A student at the elite Castilleja School, seemingly destined for Ivy League greatness. To Albert, they were the absolute epitome of perfection. They wore Cartier love bracelets, drove matching white Mercedes G-Wagons, and greeted him with blinding crest-white smiles every Sunday during their mandatory family dinners. Maintaining this illusion of a flawless, functioning household fell squarely on the capable shoulders of Beverly Monroe. Beverly was a 55-year-old black woman from Oakland, whose dignified presence and sharp, observant eyes commanded a quiet respect. Hired 4 years ago, when Albert realized he was entirely incapable of managing a massive estate and 2 grieving teenagers alone, Beverly had become the invisible glue holding the Jones family together. She did not merely clean, she orchestrated their lives. She managed the high-end caterers, oversaw the landscaping crews, meticulously pressed Albert's Tom Ford suits, and cooked organic, gluten-free meals tailored to the daughters' ever-changing dietary demands. Albert prided himself on being a progressive, generous employer. He paid Beverly a handsome salary of $90,000 a year, provided comprehensive medical benefits, and genuinely believed she was perfectly content with her station. He saw her as an essential fixture of his comfortable life, but a fixture nonetheless. Lately, however, subtle cracks had begun to form in Albert's pristine world, cracks he had been too distracted to investigate. During the past month, Beverly had appeared fundamentally exhausted. Her normally crisp navy blue work attire looked slightly disheveled, and the deep dark circles under her eyes were impossible to ignore. When Albert casually inquired about her well-being over his morning espresso, Beverly had offered a tight, forced smile, blaming her fatigue on her husband's ongoing dialysis treatments. Albert had nodded sympathetically, authorized a small Christmas bonus 2 months early, and promptly dismissed the issue from his mind. Then there were the daughters. Harper had developed a sudden flinching aversion to loud noises, and Albert had noticed a massive, ugly purple bruise blooming on her pale forearm. Clarissa had sharply interjected, blaming a reckless tennis serve during a private lesson at the country club. Albert, ever eager to avoid conflict and retreat to the safety of his spreadsheets, had accepted the explanation without a second thought. The catalyst for the ultimate unraveling of the Jones family occurred on a damp Tuesday morning in November. Albert was scheduled to fly to London for a high-stakes week-long merger negotiation. His Rimowa suitcase was packed and waiting by the grand entryway. The morning routine proceeded with its usual theatrical perfection. Clarissa, clad in designer cashmere loungewear, hugged him tightly, smelling of expensive Santal perfume. "Bring me back something from Harrod's daddy," she purred. Harper offered a demure smile, kissing his cheek. "Have a safe flight, Dad. Love you." Beverly stood quietly by the massive oak front door, holding his tailored trench coat. As Albert slipped his arms into the sleeves, he caught her eye. Beverly's expression was unreadable, but her hands, usually so steady and precise, were trembling violently. She quickly shoved them into the pockets of her apron, dropping her gaze to the floor. "Take care of the girls, B.I.," Albert instructed, adjusting his lapels. "Always, Mr. Jones." Beverly replied, her voice barely rising above a hollow whisper. Albert climbed into the waiting black Cadillac Escalade, feeling a sudden, inexplicable knot tighten in his stomach. As the luxury SUV glided down the long, oak-lined driveway, he stared out the tinted windows at the receding image of his home. Something was profoundly wrong. The trembling hands, the bruises, the hollow look in Beverly's eyes, it all collided in his mind, forming a picture of silent desperation. Halfway to San Francisco International Airport, his secure smartphone vibrated. It was his executive assistant. The London executives had contracted a severe flu variant. The in-person summit was postponed for 72 hours. "Should I reroute the driver back to Atherton, sir?" his assistant asked. Albert hesitated. The logical choice was to return home, announce his delayed trip, and resume his normal routine. But the unsettling image of Beverly's shaking hands lingered in his mind. He realized with a sudden wave of profound guilt that he knew absolutely nothing about what transpired in his home when he wasn't there. He was a ghost in his own daughters' lives, a walking ATM, who threw money at problems instead of parenting. "No." Albert instructed his assistant, a new impulsive plan forming in his mind. "Let the driver drop me off at SFO. Do not inform anyone that the trip is delayed. I'm going to take a few days off grid." He wanted to see the truth. He expected at worst to catch Clarissa throwing an unauthorized raucous house party with her Stanford friends, or perhaps discover that Harper was sneaking out to meet a boyfriend. He wanted to play the role of the stern, attentive father to finally bridge the massive emotional gap he had allowed to grow since Sarah's death. He had absolutely no idea that he was walking directly into a nightmare. Albert spent precisely 2 hours sitting in a private lounge at SFO, sipping sparkling water and watching the rain aggressively lash against the tarmac glass. When he was entirely certain that his daughters would believe he was safely cruising at 30,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, he ordered an Uber Black. To maintain the element of absolute surprise, he instructed the driver to drop him off 3 blocks away from his estate. Pulling up the collar of his trench coat against the relentless California drizzle, Albert walked the remaining distance. The affluent neighborhood was deathly quiet, the massive mansions hidden behind high walls and dense hedges of manicured ficus. Approaching his own iron gates, Albert bypassed the main keypad. He pulled out his iPhone, opened the Vivint smart home application, and used his master administrative override to silently disarm the perimeter alarms and unlock the discreet service door located near the massive 5-car garage. He slipped inside the dimly lit garage, immediately noticing that Clarissa's white G-Wagon was parked diagonally, taking up 2 spaces. The silence of the house was absolute. There was no thumping bass of a teenage party, no clinking of glasses, no laughter. The massive estate felt like a mausoleum. Leaving his wet shoes in the mudroom, Albert crept silently in his socks through the cavernous catering kitchen, stepping lightly over the heated limestone floors. The house was completely dark, save for the ambient grey light filtering through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. As he approached the grand hallway, a faint, rhythmic sound broke the silence. It was a voice, low-strained and laced with absolute terror. Albert froze, pressing his back against the cool Venetian plaster wall. He edged toward the formal conservatory, a lavish glass-enclosed room housing a grand Steinway piano and rare orchids a room they almost never used. The heavy mahogany double doors were slightly ajar, casting a thin sliver of warm yellow light across the dark hallway carpet. Holding his breath, Albert peered through the narrow opening. The scene unfolding before him violently short-circuited his brain. He had to blink rapidly, desperately, hoping the dim lighting was playing a cruel trick on his vision. Clarissa and Harper were not throwing a party. They were sitting comfortably on the plush velvet circular sofa in the center of the room. Clarissa was casually swirling a generous pour of Albert's vintage Pinot Noir in a crystal goblet, her expression a terrifying mask of cold, detached boredom. Harper sat beside her nervously, picking at her cuticles, looking slightly pale but fully compliant. Standing before them, completely isolated in the center of the expensive Persian rug, was Beverly, the dignified, composed woman who had run Albert's life for 4 years, was entirely broken. Her shoulders were violently shaking, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, dripping off her jawline onto her pristine uniform. In her trembling hands, she clutched a sleek silver iPad and a thick manila folder. "I can't do it, Clarissa. I beg of you, please don't make me do this." Beverly sobbed, her voice cracking with an agonizing despair that made Albert's blood run cold. Clarissa took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark red wine. "We've been over this, B. It's a very simple transaction. You read the script into the camera, you sign the written confession in the folder, and we make the problem go away." "It's a lie," Beverly cried out, stepping forward only to stop as Clarissa shot her a venomous glare. "You were driving, Clarissa. You were high, and you were driving your father's vintage Porsche. I was asleep in my quarters. I didn't hit that poor boy on Alpine Road." Albert felt the oxygen violently exit his lungs. A roaring sound echoed in his ears, blocking out the ambient noise of the rain outside. A hit and run. The vintage Porsche. Albert rarely drove the classic 1960 Porsche 356 he kept under a tarp in the secondary garage. "Keep your voice down, you stupid cow!" Clarissa hissed, her angelic face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. "It doesn't matter what actually happened. What matters is what the police will believe. And right now the police have an anonymous tip stating that the Jones family maid took a joyride while the family was asleep." Harper finally spoke up, her voice trembling but resolute. "We wiped the garage security footage, Beverly. We replaced it with a deep-fake video of you taking the keys. We paid a hacker in Russia $30,000 to make it perfect. It holds up to forensic scrutiny." Albert gripped the doorframe, his knuckles turning entirely white. The sheer, calculated sociopathy of his daughters, the children he had coddled, financed, and loved, was paralyzing. "Why are you doing this to me?" Beverly wept, dropping to her knees, the manila folder spilling its contents across the rug. "I covered for you. I scrubbed the blood off the bumper before your father's mechanic came. I hid the dent. I lied for you, because I loved you, because I promised your mother I would look after you." Clarissa scoffed, rolling her eyes, as if Beverly were a toddler throwing a tantrum over a toy. "You lied for us because you're a servant, B. And right now serving us means taking the fall. The boy you scrubbed off the bumper. He died in the ICU at Stanford Medical yesterday. It's vehicular manslaughter now." The horrific reality crashed down on Albert with the weight of a collapsing building. His daughters were murderers, and they were actively, methodically framing the woman who had practically raised them. "If I go to prison," Beverly pleaded, choking on her tears, "my husband will die. The medical bills. Isaiah is just starting his freshman year at Berkeley. He needs me. I am begging you in the name of God, please just hire a lawyer. Tell your father. He has the money. He can fix this." "Dad can't fix a felony vehicular manslaughter charge. B." Clarissa said, coldly, standing up and looming over the kneeling woman. "But you can. If you don't sign that confession and record the video, we trigger phase 2. Clarissa reached into the pocket of her cashmere cardigan and pulled out Beverly's own set of master keys. "We took the liberty of accessing your private quarters yesterday while you were at the market." Clarissa smiled, a terrifying, empty expression. "We planted 3 of Dad's vintage Rolex watches, a diamond necklace that belonged to Mum, and $10,000 in cash inside your son Isaiah's old high school backpack under your bed. We took time-stamped photographs. If you don't take the fall for the accident, we call the Atherton police right now. We show them the stolen goods. We tell them you've been embezzling from us for years to pay for your husband's dialysis." Harper looked away, staring firmly at the floor, but offered absolutely no objection to her sister's monstrous blackmail. "You'll go to prison for grand larceny B," Clarissa whispered, kneeling down so she was eye level with the sobbing Maid. "And Dad will aggressively press charges. You know how he gets about his money. He will ensure your family is utterly destroyed. Isaiah will be expelled from Berkeley when the scandal breaks. Your husband will lose his private health care." Clarissa picked up a heavy Mont Blanc pen from the coffee table and shoved it violently into Beverly's trembling hand. "Sign the vehicular manslaughter confession. You'll get 3 to 5 years. You'll be out in 2 for good behavior. And in exchange, the anonymous benefactor will continue to deposit $10,000 a month into your husband's medical account while you serve your time." Clarissa patted Beverly's cheek condescendingly. "It's the best deal you're going to get. Sign it." Albert stood in the hallway, the darkness wrapping around him like a suffocating shroud. He was no longer a wealthy venture capitalist. He was a colossal, catastrophic failure of a human being. He had spent his entire life building a golden cage, completely oblivious to the fact that he was raising 2 merciless, predatory monsters inside it. As Beverly slowly, agonizingly lowered the pen to the paper, a single heavy tear splashing onto the damning confession, Albert knew he could not remain in the shadows any longer. The illusion was dead. It was time to burn the golden cage to the ground. Rage, cold and absolute, finally broke the physical paralysis trapping Albert in the hallway. He pushed the heavy mahogany doors open, the brass hinges screaming a harsh protest into the otherwise silent house. Clarissa violently flinched, the crystal wine goblet slipping from her manicured fingers. It shattered against the expensive Persian rug, sending dark red splatters across the pristine beige fibers like drops of fresh blood. Harper let out a high-pitched, terrified shriek, scrambling backward onto the velvet sofa, her knees pulled tightly to her chest. Albert didn't look at his daughters. His eyes were locked entirely on the sobbing woman kneeling on the floor. He crossed the room in 3 long, deliberate strides. Reaching down, he gently grasped Beverly by the shoulders, pulling her up from the ground. Her entire body was trembling, her eyes wide, with a horrific mixture of shame and terror. She clearly expected Albert to side with his flesh and blood to become another crushing weight in the conspiracy against her. "Mr. Jones, Beverly choked out her voice, a ragged whisper. "I didn't. I swear on my son's life, I didn't." "I know B," Albert said, his voice surprisingly steady, despite the violent storm raging in his chest. He carefully took the silver Mont Blanc pen from her shaking fingers and tossed it onto the sofa. Then he picked up the manila folder containing the drafted confession and ripped it cleanly in half, letting the heavy paper fall to the rug. "I heard everything. Every single word." Clarissa's face, initially frozen in genuine shock, rapidly morphed back into a mask of calculating defiance. She stood up, smoothing the front of her cashmere cardigan, attempting to project an aura of calm authority that she had undoubtedly learned from watching her father in boardrooms. "Dad, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be over the Atlantic," Clarissa demanded, her tone laced with a sickening layer of fake sweetness. "Listen, you don't understand the context of what you just walked in on. We were just handling a public relations crisis," Albert interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. He turned to face his eldest daughter, seeing her truly for the first time. The angelic facade was gone, replaced by the hollow, sociopathic stare of a stranger. Framing an innocent woman for vehicular manslaughter, blackmailing her with planted jewelry and a deep-fake video. Is that what they teach you in your ethics seminars at Stanford, Clarissa? Harper buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with violent sobs. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she wailed, the sound muffled by her palms. "I told her we shouldn't do it. I told her we needed to call the police when it happened, but she said my life would be ruined too. She said I was an accessory." "Shut up, Harper." Clarissa snapped, her composure fracturing. She turned back to Albert, stepping closer, desperately trying to leverage the familial bond. "Dad, listen to me. I made a mistake, a stupid, momentary lapse in judgment. I had a few drinks at the country club and I took the Porsche. It was dark on Alpine Road, raining. He stepped out of nowhere. I panicked." Clarissa reached out, attempting to grab her father's arm, but Albert recoiled as if she were a venomous snake. "You hit a human being." Albert stated the horrific reality of the dead boy in the ICU crashing over him again. "You left him bleeding in a ditch, and then you came home, forced Beverly to clean your mess under the guise of an animal strike, and spent days plotting to destroy her life to save your own. That isn't a mistake, Clarissa. That is pure, unadulterated evil. She's a maid, Dad." Clarissa screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the glass walls of the conservatory. The ugly, terrifying truth of her entitlement was finally laid bare. "I am your daughter. I have a future. I'm going to inherit your firm. I am going to be somebody, she is nobody. You can't let them put me in a cage. Mom wouldn't want this." The mention of his late wife struck Albert like a physical blow, but instead of weakening his resolve, it solidified it into steel. Sarah had been kind, empathetic, and grounded. She would have been utterly repulsed by the monster standing before him. Albert realized with crushing guilt that his continuous absence, his endless indulgence, and his substitution of money for actual parenting had watered the seeds of Clarissa's narcissism until it bloomed into a deadly arrogance. "Do not ever speak your mother's name again," Albert commanded, his voice shaking with a terrifying, suppressed fury. He pulled his iPhone from his trenchcoat pocket. He didn't dial 911 immediately. First he dialed the private number of Elias Thorne, the most ruthless, expensive criminal defense attorney in San Francisco. "Elias, it's Albert Jones." He spoke clearly into the receiver, ignoring Clarissa's sudden hyperventilating panic. "I need you at my Atherton estate immediately. No, not for me. You are going to represent my employee, Beverly Monroe. She is the victim of an extortion and framing plot. My daughters are the perpetrators. Yes, you heard me correctly." Clarissa lunged forward, desperately, trying to snatch the phone from Albert's hand. "No, Dad, please. You can't do this to me." Albert effortlessly caught her wrist, his grip ironclad, shoving her firmly back onto the sofa beside her weeping sister. "Sit down," he barked a command that brokered absolutely no disobedience. He ended the call with the attorney and looked at the screen for a long, agonizing second. He was about to destroy his own family. He was about to willingly hand his eldest daughter over to a brutal penal system. But as he looked at Beverly, who was still trembling by the piano, clutching her apron, he knew there was no other choice. The moral rot ended tonight. Albert dialed 911. "Atherton Police Dispatch. What is your emergency?" the operator answered. "My name is Albert Jones." He said, his eyes locked dead onto Clarissa's terrified, tear-streaked face. "I am reporting a fatal hit-and-run, a grand larceny frame job, and felony extortion. The suspect is my daughter, Clarissa Jones. Please send officers to my residence immediately. She is a flight risk." The next 45 minutes were a masterclass in suffocating tension. The silence in the conservatory was broken only by Harper's relentless crying and the rhythmic drum of the rain against the glass roof. Clarissa had completely shut down, staring blankly at the ruined manila folder on the floor, her mind desperately, uselessly searching for a loophole that her father's wealth could buy. But the bank was permanently closed. When the Atherton police cruisers silently glided up the long driveway, their red and blue lights painting the manicured lawns in harsh, strobe-like flashes, the reality finally set in. Officers swarmed the grand entryway, their boots tracking mud across the pristine limestone. Albert met them in the hallway, projecting total cooperation. He immediately handed over the torn confession, Beverly's iPad containing the threatening messages Clarissa had drafted, and his own phone, which he had used to covertly record audio of the last 5 minutes of his daughter's vile blackmail scheme before entering the room. Clarissa was handcuffed in the center of the conservatory. As the cold steel clicked around her wrists, she thrashed violently, losing whatever remained of her dignified facade. "Dad, stop them! Do something!" she shrieked, her voice cracking as 2 officers physically dragged her toward the doorway. "I hate you. You're dead to me. You hear me? You are dead to me." Albert stood perfectly still, his hands deep in his pockets, watching the officers take his golden child away. "I lost my daughter years ago, Clarissa. I just didn't realize it until tonight." Harper was not handcuffed, but she was escorted out gently by a female officer, hyperventilating, as she was placed into a separate vehicle for questioning. She was a minor and an accessory under extreme duress, but she would still face a harrowing legal gauntlet. Once the house was cleared of his children, Albert escorted the lead detective and Elias Thorne, who had arrived in record time, to Beverly's private quarters in the staff wing. Exactly as Clarissa had boasted, they found the backpack stuffed beneath the bed. Albert formally identified his vintage Rolexes and Sarah's diamond necklace, ensuring the police photographed everything exactly as it was planted. He provided them with the contact information for his elite cybersecurity firm, instructing them to trace the $30,000 wire transfer Clarissa had sent to the Russian deepfake artist. By sunrise, the Atherton estate was a crime scene, and the Jones family name was a blazing headline on every local news network. The ensuing months were a grueling, painful descent into a very public hell. Albert stepped down from his venture capital firm, liquidating a massive portion of his assets to brace for the coming storms. The trial was a media circus, but the evidence was absolutely insurmountable. The audio recording, the traced financial wire, the planted jewelry, and Harper's tearful, devastating testimony against her sister sealed Clarissa's fate. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Clarissa Jones was found guilty of vehicular manslaughter, felony extortion, and tampering with evidence. The judge, visibly disgusted by her profound lack of remorse and the sheer cruelty of her framing attempt, sentenced her to 12 years in a state penitentiary, with no possibility of early parole. Harper, owing to her age, her coercion by Clarissa, and her ultimate cooperation, avoided juvenile detention. She was sentenced to 5 years of strict probation and mandated intensive psychiatric therapy. But Albert's most critical work was not the destruction of his old life, it was the restitution he owed the innocent. He created a comprehensive, irrevocable $5 million trust in Beverly's name. It was structured to completely cover her husband, Isaiah's dialysis, and future transplant costs pay for their son's entire education at UC Berkeley, and ensure Beverly would never have to clean another person's house for the rest of her life. Beverly initially refused, her pride wounded, but Albert insisted, sitting at her modest kitchen table in Oakland until she signed the paperwork. "It isn't an apology, Bea," Albert had told her gently, drinking cheap coffee from a chipped mug. "An apology is just words. This is justice. You protected my family when I wasn't looking. It's time I protected yours." Albert also quietly established an anonymous, massive foundation to support the family of the young boy who had died on Alpine Road. It could not bring their son back, but it ensured his siblings would have their futures secured. 1 year later, the sprawling $15 million mansion in Atherton was sold to a tech billionaire from Seattle. Albert Jones relocated to a modest 3-bedroom home in Palo Alto. There were no maids, no caterers, and no illusions of perfection. He learned to cook, though poorly. He learned to listen. He drove Harper to her therapy appointments every Tuesday and Thursday, sitting patiently in the waiting room, finally doing the grueling, unglamorous work of being a father. Sometimes, late at night, Albert would sit on his small back patio, watching the rain fall. He would think of the golden cage he had built and the monstrous things that had grown inside it. He had lost his fortune, his reputation, and his eldest daughter. But as he looked through the window and saw Harper doing her homework at the kitchen table, slowly healing, he realized something profound. For the first time in his life, Albert Jones wasn't hiding behind his wealth. He was finally living in the truth. If this chilling story of extreme wealth, dark betrayal, and ultimate justice kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life-inspired daily dramas. Drop a comment below telling us what you would have done in Albert's shoes. Your support helps us bring more gripping narratives to your screen.